be moderating this session. So, I'm doing my PhD here. So, before I came into PhD, I was working in subtitling and dubbing. So, it was just after college that I joined for my subtitling and dubbing job as a project coordinator. So, when I started, one day I got a project to create SDH for a movie, subtitles for deaf and hard of hearing. So back then, if I honestly had no clue who I was serving with the project that I was creating. It was just another project for me and just another specification that I had to meet. Um, there are a lot of guidelines already set, which I had to meet. There are specific characters per second, characters that can be added in a line. There's a lot of set guidelines that I had to meet. Just like any other project, I completed the project, I met my deadlines, I wrapped up, met the guidelines that was asked to be met, I wrapped up that project. Then one fine day, I was at a family event, and there I met a family friend. I've known him for a very long time. He's deaf. So we were having a conversation with my very broken sign language and his lip reading, which he's really good at. So with that, we were having a conversation, and one thing led to another. We were having a conversation about a movie that released that week. And yes, I asked him, did he watch that movie? So he said no. He did not watch because that movie didn't provide captioning. And his wife, who's also deaf, she primarily relies on sign language for communication, and captioning was really important for her to understand. So that's something that stayed with me. Suddenly, I had people that I knew in real life who couldn't go to movies with his wife because of one basic thing that didn't exist. So it was not abstract anymore. That's the moment that SDH was not just a guideline for me anymore. It became a person or a community that I had to cater to. And that is the gap, and the gap between guidelines that are on paper and actual person is exactly what today we are looking at in panel. As more of everyday life moves online, education, healthcare, jobs, public service, it's worth asking a simple question. Who gets left out while all of this is being built? So, through today's panel, titled Missing Digital Communities, Design and Policy for Inclusion, we are hoping to move through a few things together, starting with your own journeys in this work, understanding what accessibility really means today, the gap between policy and practice, what it means to build accessibility from day one instead of retrofitting it later. If time permits, we'll also look at the economics behind it, where the advancements are taking us, and we'll open the floor to questions. So the organizing committee has actually made my job really easy with an amazing panel with me. I have Dr. Akashdeep Bansal, Kavya Mukhija, and Dr. Meera Venkat with me. So three people who will bring very different and equally important perspectives to the conversation that we're having today. Thank you all for joining us today. So before we go into specifics, I want to start with basics. The word accessibility and inclusion gets used around a lot. Its meaning has grown over time. So I want to build the understanding through each of you and your own work. So my first question is to Kavya. Let's start with you. In the present age, what does a truly inclusive space actually mean? And with that, could you also talk a bit about the work that you do?
Absolutely. So thank you so much firstly for having me here. I would like to begin quickly with a visual description of myself. I'm a young woman with a physical disability. I use an electric wheelchair to navigate. And I'm today wearing a light blue top and white pants. I also have a sling bag, red sling bag across my chest, and I have a wheatish complexion and short black hair. So talking about my journey, so I was born with this condition called arthrogryposis multiplex congenita, which is a tongue twister, I know, for most of us here, as was for me when I was young. And it basically means that my muscles are weak and I use a wheelchair to navigate the world. I also rely on my parents, who are my primary caregivers, for a lot of activities of daily living. And accessibility since the beginning has been an innate part of my life and lived experiences. So as we see even today that, largely physical spaces are inaccessible for me, which was also the case even more so back in the early 2000s. So when my parents were getting me admitted into a school in New Delhi, they faced rejection from almost each one of them because they did not know what inclusion meant for a disabled person. And they did not have the required support systems in place that could enable my holistic inclusive education at the same level of my peers. So that meant that my parents had to fill in the gaps in the absence of the inclusive support mechanisms. So since physical infrastructure was not available or not provided by the school, my parents had to physically carry me to different classes just to make sure that my education did not suffer from any of these barriers. And this is what happens, in most cases, especially with people with disabilities, with girls with disabilities, that their parents, their caregivers, their guardians have to come in. They have to be the scaffolding that could enable their inclusion into society. So this happened for a long period of time, and after a lot of requests to the principal of the school, my classroom, which was earlier on the first floor, was moved to the ground floor after a lot of communication with her. But that also meant that it was inclusive in a very checkbox kind of a way, because my classroom remained there for until I graduated or until I left school. So so there was also this thing that the students there were not quite comfortable in studying in the same class. So as a result, my peers would move every year. So I would have a new batch of students to be friends with each year, and I would stay in the same class. So this is what happens. So ultimately, as Gayatri also mentioned, who bears the brunt of it? Who bears the actual cost of it? It is the poor people with disabilities. It is their family. It is the caregivers. So as I graduated, as I moved into college, the accessibility became better, of course, but at the same time, it was not as much, right? The real face of accessibility when I realized is when I moved to London for my second master's in disability design and innovation at University College London. And there I did not have to advocate for myself that, this is what I need as accessibility. I need a ramp, and I need an accessible classroom, I need an accessible toilet. It was already there. It was there, and I was informed that this is what we have in place, and if you need anything else, we are here to provide whatever you need. And I think this is the baseline that we need to establish and we need to work upon. That accessibility holds no value if the people have to ask for it. Imagine moving into a classroom and having to ask for a flight of stairs to reach the seats. That makes no sense. It is built in, it is understood. And so should the ramp also be understood, or any kind of accessibility need that any disabled person has. So with that, I'd like to take a pause and hand it back to Gayatri now.
Thank you, Kavya. That was something that you said, that we have come a long way, but we are still far, far away from what is actually needed in place. So I'm moving on to Dr. Akashdeep. Your work is specifically in digital accessibility through Saral X. How do you see assistive technology moving from being treated as a niche innovation to becoming more part of the mainstream. Also, can you tell us more about Saral X?
Sure. Like, first of all, if I talk about myself and Saralex, during my introduction came up, like, I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa when I was just 10-year-old, due to which I was losing my eyesight gradually. And like, for those who doesn't know anything about retinitis pigmentosa, in short, it is called RP. In RP, what happens is, it's a retina disorder, due to which initially you start losing your night vision, and then you start losing your peripheral vision. Like, what used to happen is, like, what I'm seeing straight, I can see. Like, someone is sitting just in front of me, but if something is coming from side, I can't see that person. Or if I'm like riding the bicycle on the road, I can see what is in front of me, but if something suddenly comes from the side, I cannot realize, okay, from where this thing has come up suddenly. So that was going on, but we grown in the era now when we rely heavily on the digital India. So I was the go-to person in a family to take care of everything. But when in 2021 my eyesight reached to that level that I can't see anymore, like right now I can't see any of you. If you guys will give me any feedback through sounds, I will be able to understand how many people are sitting. But for me, no one is sitting in front of me until I hear any sound. So that was the point when I realized, okay, now even for the basic things like ordering the food or doing anything on the e-commerce platform, I need to rely on someone else. Like, for even doing the basic payment or doing the basic stuff, I need to take someone's help. Even sometimes I need to share my credentials with someone else to do the basic things. So that is what accessibility is for me. Like, it's almost like an oxygen for me, that I cannot live without accessibility. Like, I can't do anything. For me, it is not possible easily to go out and do the shopping. For me, it is very easier if the digital world is accessible. But if even the digital world is not accessible, I cannot do even things through the digital world. Now, if I specifically comes to the question and what at Saralex we are doing, so at Saralex what we are doing is we are helping corporates in understanding how persons with disabilities interact with the digital world. Like, if I ask you basic questions, how many of you know how a blind person can use the mobile app? Does anyone, like, or if I ask you how a deaf person can enjoy the video having the audio content? Or maybe if I ask you, how can a person operate the computer who doesn't have both the upper limbs? Like, many of you may not have answer to some of these questions. And that's what creates the gap when the product owner, the product developer doesn't know even such basic questions, or even the content creator. All of you guys are from the media. Like, how many times when you post something on the social media or create any media, how many times you think about how a person with disability is going to be consuming the content which you are creating, okay? And this is a gap happening because many of you may not have heard about like how person with disability even consumes the digital content. Similarly, the product managers never think about how persons with disability may be using the product which they are developing. And that's why they end up creating the product which is not usable by persons with disabilities. So what we are helping them is, we are helping them in understanding these gaps, what they are missing out, why it is important to be done, and then helping them understand where are the problems in their existing digital asset today, how they can fix it, and ultimately making their digital product usable by persons with disability. Now, specifically to the question, like, assistive technologies are evolving. That is gonna, like, there are a lot of evolution which has happened. If I talk about this, like the basic tool which I use, the screen reader, if you go 2 decades back or 3 decades back, there was very basic or nothing like screen reader exists, okay? But with time, the screen reader has become very smart. It is a basically text-to-speech based software which reads out whatever is written on my screen, okay? So with time, the assistive technology has evolved, but what need to be done is, are we building the ecosystem, are we building the infrastructure which is compatible with assistive technology? Think about, like if I give you an analogy to understand this, think about a person who cannot walk. That person has a wheelchair to go around. But the wheelchair will be able to help that person to go around only and only if the surfaces are either plane or there is a ramp with the appropriate inclination angle. If there are only stairs, the person cannot move ahead, okay? Even though the person is a wheelchair, which is an assisted tool. But still the person can't go ahead. Similarly, in the digital infrastructure, there are different kind of tools which exist. But do we have that standards met in the digital infrastructure due to which the person with disability who are using the digital, like any of these assisted technology, is able to use the digital asset? So that is with what I will conclude for now, and I will add more as we move ahead.
So I just wanted to know, are all apps, how do I say, adapted to the whole text reader? Like, are all apps already available or compatible with the text readers that are already there?
No. It's hardly 4% of the digital platforms are usable as of date. 96% of the digital platforms are not usable for persons with disabilities.
Yeah, so we'll get back to more on discussing about how, from where the conversations should actually start to make digital spaces more accessible. So over to Meera. You work a lot around helping businesses grow and think about strategy. This is something that we were also discussing a little while ago. So when you're in a room with business leaders talking about what makes a brand successful, today does accessibility even come up as a part of the conversation, or is it seen as a separate entity from growth and strategy altogether?
That's a very interesting. Am I audible? Yeah. That's a very interesting question which you have asked. Let me also give you a brief background about what I do, so it will make more sense for people to understand from which angle I am talking. So I basically run a C-suite management firm called Race Global, and we keep influencing the board of directors and C-level executive to make any kind of a policy changes and to implement in their own company. So this is what in short we do. Plus we also influence the government, if it is possible, in our own ways through the chamber and offices to make any kind of a policy decision. So coming from that angle, answering to your question which you have asked. So I can start with a data point, telling that around 16% of the entire population in the world is experiencing disability in some form or the other. So corporates are not very, very different, and they also experience the same. But if you ask me, is it inbuilt? It is not inbuilt till date, So it is only taken as, a standalone initiative which is being done. But more of corporates like Microsoft and Google and many other big corporates right now are looking to have inbuilt solutions for all these things. So I could say that probably around 3 to 4% of very innovative corporates are looking at doing this as an inclusive function. But is the brand as your question was all about branding, right? How the brand?
So I was asking how, when there is a discussion about how brands can be more successful, like when you're guiding them through the whole process, do the discussions about making brands accessible come on?
Not much about the accessibility unless and until we are going to talk about diversity and inclusion as a topic. But this could be one of the ideas which we can talk about. Because this discussion, branding more happens with a CHRO and a CMO, because the Chief Marketing Officer is responsible for the branding outside, to the outside world, to all the stakeholders. And CHRO is responsible for the branding inside. That is about the employee branding and the employer branding. Yes, to a larger extent, it is definitely a talk of CHRO group. But from outside, if you ask about outside branding, this is not being much talked about right now. But having said that, I think in the future, it need to be a part of discussions also. Because I see a lot of innovative companies are doing a lot of inclusive stuff, like Microsoft, in their Xbox gaming series, where they are making it to be accessible for everybody. So it is not only an average student or average, younger generation can only access it. It is not like that. When they are forming the gaming series itself, they are looking at the bigger picture. So can this be used by every community of the people who are there? So that is the angle which they are looking at. And I would like to also draw something from what Kavya was talking about. She was talking about her schooling, where she was not able to get into the top floors, and she was only in one classroom for the whole of the time. So this is somewhere where they have not thought about this. The school, or I'm not talking about the school, or government organization, or corporates, they don't think about this. They only react to the situation. If anything comes in that, then they try to find a solution. But that should not be the case. A classic example is one of my neighbor. He was taking his, mother, who is 82 and above years, for a trip, a vacation to Germany, and not in and around India. So when I classically asked him, why you are doing this? Because she can't walk, because it's her age problem. She has to use her wheelchair. So he was telling, in India it is very, very difficult to go ahead and do a vacation even for my mother, because the accessibility is not there. Everywhere he has to depend on somebody else. But in European countries, specifically in Germany, they give first preference to this. So everything and anything is inbuilt for each and every community of people who are coming in. So doing a vacation in Germany is far, far, far easier than doing a vacation in India. So that is what accessibility is all about for me from an individual point of view. I'll give it a pause here, then we will take it up later.
It's actually interesting what you said. Last day we had a hackathon, and there were people from Assistive. If I think Akash must be aware about Assistive. So they were here and we were interacting, and he told something about any individual is disabled at some point in life. This was his words. So there was also a seminar that I'd like to quote, American Association of Disabled, who call the abled body as TAD, which is temporarily abled body.
Right.
So if you think about it, that's also something like at some point in life, everybody is also dependent on someone else. So if you would like to move on to the next area with that? Yes. So now we know a lot about what accessibility is. So the next question is, there's a lot of policies in place. We hear about a lot of policies that make it mandatory to make spaces more inclusive. So now the question becomes, what is actually happening on the ground? So I recently came across a report that stated that 98.1% of the home pages in digital spaces had at least one WCAG failure. So Akash, since this is your area and you've helped create different government accessibility guidelines in different fields, could you talk a bit about the existing digital inclusion policies like WCAG? Looking at policies now, what's the gap between what's written on paper and what's actually getting implemented once they reach the real platforms?
Sure. So there are a couple of issues there. Like nowadays we have lots of policies, but as usual in India, like if you see, there are a lot of different policies, not just for accessibility, but for many other things. But the major problem is the execution, the implementation. How we are implementing, how well we are monitoring. Like if I specifically talk about the guidelines which are there for the accessibility of the films, that was passed around 2.5 years back. And it was clearly mandated that in India, there shouldn't be any movie released which is going to be streamed in the public theater which does not have the closed caption or the sign language, okay, and the sign language, and the audio description, okay. The movie should not get released without the closed caption, audio description, and the sign language. But like if you see on reality what is happening in the ground, it's completely different. A lot of movies are coming up now because it's a mandate. It's a very strict regulated area where CBFC doesn't give the certificate. But there is no mechanism to understand what quality of audio description is coming up. For just getting the compliance, I can give any random audio description, or maybe the person who is checking in the CBFC, does that person has an understanding of what is an appropriate audio description or not? Okay. Similarly, in digital accessibility, one thing is compliance. Another one is it usable by person with disability or not? Okay. I can do the tick mark that my website is accessible, but the problem happens with accessibility is that these apps and websites are very fast changing applications. Almost each of the day-to-day app get update every 15th day or every month. Okay. And now even if I make one particular version of the app accessible, I'm like, okay, now my compliance tick mark is done. I don't need to worry about accessibility at least for another 1 year, unless and until my deadline comes up again for the compliance. And now I'm free to think about thinking about the accessibility. And as soon as the next version of the application comes up, accessibility starts breaking. Okay? Then the second issue comes up is the ownership issue. There is no clear definition of who owns the accessibility in the corporates. Even in the ministry, many of the times this debate happens between, is the accessibility responsibility of DEPWD, the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disability, or every ministry and department has to take care about the accessibility? Okay? Ideally, it has to be taken care by everyone. Think about if there is only one person in your entire university, entire campus, who is responsible for accessibility, the problem that person is going to run into is that person has to go and look after each and every policy. Accessibility is not part of each and every discussion which is happening. It's not embedded in each and every decision which has been taken inside the campus. And only whatever the bandwidth that particular person has, or whatever that person has the capacity, only that person will be able to do. Similarly, in the ministry, what is happening is whatever is in the capacity of the DPWD, they are trying their best, but a lot of things doesn't come under the purview of the DPWD itself. And there, the debate starts, the accessibility is taken care by the particular ministry or the DPWD. Okay. Then, linking with the first problem which I talked about, that as soon as the next update comes up, still accessibility is treated as an afterthought. It is not treated at the design level or at the implementation level. Ideally, it should have been thought at the design level itself. Like think about, I'm going to give you more examples related to the physical accessibility because there you will be able to more relate. Think about when someone is constructing this building, if that person hasn't thought about accessibility, what is going to happen in that case? The person has first developed the building, the designing has happened, no consideration of accessibility. The building got constructed, no consideration of accessibility. After the building has been opened for the public, now people are starting to think about accessibility. Now they are saying, okay, yeah, we missed out from the building the ramp here. Now we have to build the ramp here. Now it's all about retrofitting. And that's what exactly is happening in the mobile application as well. While the designers and developers are developing, they don't think about the accessibility at that point of time. The accessibility discussions are happening after the launch of the product. By the time the accessibility gets fixed for a particular version of the app, already the next version is ready to get released or might have already released in the public. Okay? So there is no benefit of fixing the bugs. So these are a lot of different kind of things are happening due to which like there's a lot of difference when it comes to in terms of the policy, what is there and what is happening in the ground. I will pause here.
Can I add something to this?
Yes, please.
So you're talking about the policy. So here I would like to talk about two things. One is responsibility, one is accountability. So responsibility is the work need to be done. That's the responsibility. Accountability is owning the outcome of that. So mostly in this policy cases, there are a lot of policies. Every time when you see, there will be a new policy which is coming out. When thousands policy come out, how many are successful? Because the second stage where it comes in, where he pointed out, is the implementation of those policy. So writing a fancy policy just for the heck of it and putting a tick mark, yes, we also have this in our corporate or in the government, is not useful at all. Use is when you try to implement that policy. And implementation will not stop there. You need to have a checkpoint. Advisory council for accessibility separately to see that whether what action points have been taken. What is the outcome of those action points? Is it implementable? Or if it is not implementable, what kind of a changes which we need to bring to that policy? Then only, we can say that the policy is getting implemented successfully. Otherwise, policy stays only in paper and nothing can be implemented. And so, as a point of it, what need to be included is also the checkpoint, So there need to be a certification, there need to be an advisory council, there need to be an outcome-based one, and if there is need to be a re-implementation of the policy with the changes, it need to be done. Then only it will become effective. Otherwise, we will only keep talking about policies on the air, but on the grassroots level, it's not going to get any implementation at all. And lastly, whichever department is going to be taken care, it should be included in the KPA. If it is in a corporate, the CEO KPA should also be to look at whether this has been implemented and what is the outcome of that. And he will be the responsible person. Everybody are responsible and he will be accountable for this. Same thing with the government also. So, even in the government, responsibility can lie with so many departments, but there need to be accountability which is also there, and it need to be spoken about. Only when you speak about outcomes, then we will know whether it is effective or not. Yeah.
It's actually interesting what you said about responsibility and accountability, the perspective that you've given. And like Akash said that there are guidelines that's already in place, but when you actually look, it's maybe like to release an OTT, having a accessibility feature is mandatory for visually impaired, maybe having an audio description. But there's nuanced layers to it, like which language, a question of language comes in a country like India, where there's a lot of languages. So there's a lot of layers also that needs to be looked into. What about you, Kavya? What do you think is the biggest reason that a lot of well-intentioned guidelines fail to translate into real life?
I feel the biggest reason is lack of awareness. No one would say that I want to intentionally exclude blind people, or I want to intentionally exclude deaf people. But the fact is that accessibility and inclusion or such curriculums are rarely included in media studies or in architecture, and this is where the problem starts, I would say. So a lot of architects that I have met, since my work largely focuses on built environment and physical infrastructure, a lot of times they say that disability focused design was our extra curriculum, the optional module that we had in college. So if you're going to make that optional, but disabled people don't have the choice to be disabled or non-disabled, right? We are disabled by hook or by crook. So such design principles should be built into curriculums, into systems, as as my co-panelists also spoke about, that the intention and the thought has to be there since the beginning. And then of course the accessibility is not a one-stop destination, right? It continuously evolves, it continuously changes. So there also needs to be continuous checks and balances across all fields, to ensure that whether the proposed changes are actually usable by disabled people or not. And then I would say that disabled people should not be just the end-use testers, just to give feedback on the products that are made, but they should be included in the design process itself. So whether it is through the management, whether it is through the producers or the creators, the people should be involved in the process itself, so that if anything gets missed out in terms of accessibility, it can be rectified then and there.
That's actually interesting. I was talking to a deaf individual, and I was interacting with him regarding having subtitles in movies. And one thing that he told was, we don't want subtitles because that's not our language. Our primary language is sign language. That is what we want. So yeah, the conversation should have them included more, because that's what we are ultimately trying to aim to for a change. That reminded me of a story. I had visited a zoo recently when my nieces were in town, and there were the zoo claimed to be a very accessible zoo, and there were a lot of ramps, but that's how they claim to be entirely accessible. But anyways, all the ramps were either broken or very steep. Like, it's extremely dangerous to use those ramps. So the conversations around how do we make people responsible and accountable for such instances should continue further. But drawing on what Akash earlier said, born accessible, that's a word that's used a lot in academics when it comes to research for accessibility. There's a lot of people talking about making inclusivity born accessible products. So, Kavya, do you think born accessible is realistic and a standard that can be adopted by everyone, or does it only work for organization that already has resources?
See, I think it's not a one person's job again to ensure that born accessible is included into everything. I think every sector, every person at different levels should take up their responsibility of ensuring that whatever they're producing is accessible for people with various access needs, right? So not just for people with disabilities, and this is because I think accessibility largely is understood just being required by disabled people. But I would like to ask the audience, how many times have you, as non-disabled people, if I may assume, have used a ramp in your life? Can I have a show of hands, maybe clicks? How many of you have used closed captions on Instagram Reels or on Netflix or Prime Video? Right? So so many of us. So accessibility is not just for disabled people, it is for everyone, every one of us. And things can be made accessible if we start from the conceptual stages itself. So right when we're thinking about coming up with something, building a product, building a building, or whatever that we are producing, if we start from the conceptual stage itself and we include disabled people, I think the idea of born accessible would be a reality very soon.
Yes, that's really interesting. Meera, do you think, since you work with a lot of companies, is born accessibility from day one something that can be reality in companies? Because before they get funding or a government contract or the compliance checks that they already have, do you think born accessible is something that companies would also adopt soon?
I think it will become a reality. I'll tell you why. She was talking about, you were also talking about a deaf person who's watching a movie. If the caption is not there, then he will not be able to look at it. But look at the reality today. Today, if a caption can be used only by the people who are not able to hear, what happens when I am in an airport or I am traveling through a train? I would not want to use a loud voice, but I use the captions to read, correct? So it has to be born reality in everything. Everybody need to be included. If you're not going to include everybody and if you're going to have it only for a set of people, In the later days, you have to move from that level to an inclusive level. That time, your investment is going to shoot up double the time. So it is better you include it in the blueprint stage itself. When you're designing itself, get all these people also to get involved. Because he was talking about when there is an app development which is happening, people are not thinking, designer is not thinking about the accessibility part of it, or the project manager is not thinking about the accessibility part of it. But when you're designing itself, you bring that inclusivity also and look at a different angle and see whether it can be a bond, whether it can be including all the community, then it makes sense. So, in a long run, it will become mandatory. If it is not going to be mandatory, then it will not serve the purpose at all. So, corporates will make it like how CSR, few years back, it was not mandated. They were only influencing, telling it's a good thing to give back to the society. Nobody did it, except for few people who were really interested. But with the government brought in telling that compulsory 2% of your profit need to be going as a CSR, that's when all the corporates moved their funds to CSR. Likewise, unless and until if you're going to get it mandated, the implementation is not going to be very easy.
Akash, would you like to also tell us, like how Meera told that in few years we are expecting the scene to be very different. Right. Can you also tell us how, when you started, how it was and currently how it is, and how you are expecting it to be in another few years?
Sure. So I agree with all the panelists that the bond accessible is the only way because that is the most economical way. Again, if I use the same analogy, that when you are constructing this building, if you haven't thought about the accessibility at the same time, then you will need to spend a lot of money in doing the retrofit, and that will also destroy the visual appearance, visual aesthetics of this building. Okay, if you think about the accessibility later on. So born accessibility has to be the reality, and that will happen. Now, the other point which Meera touched upon is the legal, the importance which legal is going to play. Legal is very important, and that is also going to create the floor for that. But what I am more hopeful that what will create the ceiling for accessibility is the two things. One is the innovation, another one is the business case. Even till now, we don't have much clarity about what is the business case for accessibility, and that is the biggest problem. Why even most of the CXOs level still are not willing to do it as like the by default thing. Why it is still considered as a compliance thing. The reason is, like if I talk about one of the conversation I was happening with one of the companies some time back, I was interacting with the chief business officer of that company. And it's a very big startup, and I can definitely say all of you must be having that particular app in all of your mobile phones, okay? And that kind of a company, when I was talking about, he asked me two questions, and I was not having answer to any of these questions. So the questions was, once we make the app accessible, how many new users I can expect to have who will be using my application, okay? The second question was, should I expect more users or should I expect more repeat use case? That the users who are already using, they will be using more frequently. And the problem why I was not able to answer these questions, like all of us talk about that 16% of the global population is of persons with disability. But if I ask you, like, how many of them face problems when the digital world is not accessible? Does anyone have the answer? Maybe not, okay? Then the second question comes up. Let's say when I know X percentage of the 16% person with disability are going to face the problem when the mobile application is not accessible. Then the second question comes is, how many of them already know how to use the digital platforms with the use of assistive technology? Okay? So till the time we don't have the visibility about the data, it is not going to be the true reality which I personally feel. Okay? And here I will also touch upon one more aspect. Like there is a framework which I generally use called ABLE framework. Unless and until we work on the ABLE framework, I will talk about what is ABLE framework is, we cannot imagine that accessibility is going to become a true reality. ABLE stands for awareness, business, legal, and education. Okay? Unless and until we have all the 4 pillars there, in awareness, we have to have that clear awareness about what is accessibility, why it is important. In the legal, right policies, but beyond that, the right implementation. Like I talked about that Ministry of Information and Broadcasting as a policy. But even till today, there is no centralized platform where persons with disability can directly complain with Ministry of Information and Broadcasting if they are coming across any movie which is not accessible, or if they are having any problem regarding accessibility with any theater. There is no centralized platform. Even no advisory like where a person with disability has to reach out if they are facing any problem. Then the business case I already talked about, so I will not repeat it. And the education, in the education, it has to be like Kavya and Meera also talked about, like we need to make sure that accessibility has to be embedded in the education, in the curriculum. If we are not teaching, like think about, like if I talk about the digital accessibility, if software developer have never learned about accessibility, whatever the person is going to develop, that is not going to be accessible. So these are the couple of points I want to add before it go, like I will pause here and we'll add more as we go.
You've actually touched upon a lot of interesting areas, and among that, what you both told regarding when he interacted with a business owner, and what you told, ultimately it's about profit. But don't you think 16% population of the world is a huge population to be investing for? Like,
that is, but everyone in this 16% population does not face problem when the website is not accessible. Think about Kavya. If an app is not accessible, I'm not pretty much 100% sure what, like, is there any other problem, like any other difficulty which Kavya faced. But if she's just like using the wheelchair, she can use any mobile app, any website without any barrier. And she's also part of that 16%. Okay? Yes. What percentage of this 16% is going to face the problem if my app is not accessible? Do we have answer to that?
Yeah,
I think interestingly, Akash, in the start of his conversation, when he was talking about the website, he was telling 95% of the websites which are right now available, they have issues with accessibility. That means you can see, including this corporate, including government, including any kind of website which are there. There is a policy. You have to follow the norms. But how many people have followed the norm? How much it is fully, done according to the standards? We are not yet there. 95% of the website is not full-fledgedly accessible.
Yeah. So there's a lot of money, but that's not going to the right places. I might be talking a lot about films, but there's a lot of movies that is dubbed into a lot of languages. Like even when I was working, we used to get dubbing requests for around 30, 40 languages. Mm-hmm. And the term that they used to use is accessibility of films. The film is now accessible. They used to interchange the term with globalization. But yeah, accessibility is the term that they say. The film is now accessible to all. So there's a lot of money going into dubbing and subtitling into a lot of languages. But the same movies, if I take into consideration, there's not much accessible choices. Like there's no audio descriptions or no subtitles for deaf and hard of hearing. So there's a lot of money that's being put into, maybe it's not put into the places that we are talking about right now, accessible choices. The actual access. Yes, please.
We're talking. So there can be many reasons, but one of the reasons is even the government should come forward and give some tax, what do you say, tax benefit for the people who are doing the movie. If they are going to include this part of it, because everything comes in terms of budgets, right? So when a person is producing a movie, he will be having certain kind of a budget which he has to work inside. So anything which is going out of the way, any external dubbing or this or that which he has to include, requires investment, correct? But if he is going to say this is going to be accessible, what is the kind of a benefit which he is going to reap? Because if a movie is going to be seen only by 80 people, and he is looking only at that 80% of people, if they see the movie, I am getting my money back. But you are not making it accessible for all the 100 people to watch the movie, because of he needs to put extra fund. So, but if the government is coming back and saying that we will give you a tax rebate, and we will encourage OTT filmmakers to do all these things, and there is an extra tax rebate which is being given, then the interest will be more from the business angle point of it.
So yeah, building it from day one, it sounds like the sounds right in principle. So Kavya, before we end this area of discussion, do you think that when accessibility gets talked about mainly in business terms, as something companies should do because it's profitable, does that actually help the cause, or does it take away from the idea that accessibility as a basic right, not just a good business decision?
So I think that really depends on the kind of intention you're doing it with, because a lot of times, like I said, it becomes like just a compliance focused activity, just that we have to make it accessible on paper. So if there is a ramp, they would make a ramp 1:12 ratio and all the parameters. But so that is just one part of it. But what happens after that? Is the ramp being maintained? If there are any broken elements of the ramp, are they being modified accordingly with time? So one aspect is that. A lot of times what I've seen is, there would be a ramp, but people would park their vehicles right in front of it. So if it's there, the ramp is there on paper, but it is not actually usable by a disabled person, right? So this kind of this kind of empathetic approach also needs to be there. So like I said, accessibility is, so it also depends on what we are perceiving as accessibility. How do we define accessibility? Are we just defining it in terms of infrastructure or in terms of digital models, or we are also including people into this ecosystem? If we are, are we including the sensitization and training of the staff which manages those premises? Are we using, are we including the sensitization of the creators, of the software engineers who are producing these apps, who are coding the elements? Are we giving them the required know-how as to how to support people with disabilities when they meet them? Right? So I think when all of this comes together, and I would also like to address one more point, is that a lot of times we hear, as people in this field, that accessibility is very, very expensive. It's just 16% of people, of the population that we're talking about. And we can't include everyone, so this is what we hear. But if we flip the lens, the cost of exclusion is much more, right? So we have to also think of that. So for example, something that takes around 30 minutes for a non-disabled person might take 90 minutes plus additional labor for a disabled person, right? So it's right 3x the standards which are there, but there are also additional elements. People have to take longer routes just to find accessible way arounds, right? A lot of times accessible toilets are locked, or they are used as storage spaces. So that is also the additional cost that someone is bearing, right? It is just not showing on paper. So we also have to take that perspective into consideration.
That is something really interesting that you shared, and I think everyone sits with that thought. So before we wrap up our session and open the panel to questions from the floor, I just wanted to ask one last thing. Actually, just two more questions, sorry. So if you could change one thing in India right now, drawing from the topic that we are currently in for digital communities, so that fewer of them go missing in the space, being built, what would it be? Like, I'm opening it to you all.
Can I take that?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes. First is policy. So, I'm going to repeat it once again, but while even writing a policy, they have to include every stakeholder who's involved in that. So, policy should also not be only on paper. It need to be implemented, and it need to be checked. So there need to be a council. There need to be an advisory accessibility council who has to come and check it. And then it need to be certified. Today, we are only drawing the policy and leaving it there. Outcomes are not measured. If you really wanted to make some change, build it with them. Start in the blueprint stage itself. Make sure that it is being implemented, and make sure it has been checked and it has been certified, and there need to be a proper feedback mechanism. So if there is any correction which is required, that also need to be done. Then only it is successful. So this is the first thing which every corporate, every government need to focus on.
Anything that you would like to ask?
Sure. So one thing, if I have to change, what I will do is I will work on the education, like how we can embed about accessibility in the education. And I will give you an analogy why I feel education is more important. Because if you think about when Britishers has to rule India, what they did? They changed the education policy of India. Okay? What Macaulay does. So once you change the education policy, once you embed the accessibility into the education, accessibility will be everywhere. Then you don't need to do anything. Because everyone will have that empathy about accessibility. Everyone will do everything keeping accessibility in the mind, and all the things will automatically start getting solved. So that's one thing which I would like to say.
What about you, Kavya? You've been outside, you have studied in London, maybe not digital spaces also, maybe the infrastructural accessibility, also some incident or something that you would like to share that you wish that is something that was there in India.
Right, so I think there are a lot of things, like I can give a list of things that we need to work upon. But for starters, I would say that we need to talk about disability, amongst ourselves. Disability needs to be a dining table discussion, because even with the policy, even with the curriculums, if we are not openly talking about disability, addressing the stigma, the barriers that are there, I think we will not be able to foster an inclusive society at all. So we need to do that, one. And secondly, there needs to be mechanisms where people can access accessibility. For example, while I was in London, any type of communication that we received from the NHS, which is the National Health Service, if I'm not wrong, in the UK, there used to be a line that said that if you need the information in any other format, feel free to reach out to us. So so it's just not digital accessibility. If I needed anything in braille, in fine print, in large text, or in video form, so they were open to that accommodation as well. So I think we need to widen our perspectives of accessibility, because as the experiences of disabled people differ across the spectrum, so does accessibility, right? So I think with these approaches, we will be able to reach somewhere towards an inclusive ecosystem.
Thank you. I think we are all in academics. Making more conversation is something that we all can do. Right, everyone? Right? Yes. And like you said, having a helpline, that's something that Akash had also touched upon. So I think that's also something that maybe the next time we are here to discuss, that's also something on the plate. So before we open the questions, we've covered a lot actually, from the gap between policy to what it actually takes to build accessibility. Before we open, is there something that you all like to end with? So, or can I open the panel to questions?
We can open.
Yeah, we can take
Yes,
the questions.
please.